All right, I hope you guys are doing well. I know the semester ends Wednesday. Well, our last class period is Wednesday, so I wanted to make sure I go over perception with you. We just had a quiz on Friday, so I'm not looking to, give you another test this quick. I might have a question put up on Wednesday. It's just going to be like a short answer that you'll have to answer, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there might be a few questions to it. That's all I'm looking for, really. So don't think of it as a huge midterm or final exam or whatever it might be. It's just going to be the last part of chapter 4. I mean, that's all we could really get to this year, just because how things, obviously, how everything kind of played out with online and with COVID and everything, and not being in class and a lot of the material. I mean, let's face it, in a semester, it's kind of hard to get through. But that being said, again, it's just going to be a few questions, nothing too crazy. It's just on the end of chapter 4, what I'm going to go over today and tomorrow, and that'll be it. So, hope you guys are doing well. There's no bell ringers for today. Again, I want to try to get through this information with you and make sure that we're all finishing up on chapter 4 here. All right, so where are we at here? Yeah, there we go. Actually, I want to go to illusions. All right, so with illusions, I mean, I wanted to talk about a few of them today, and kind of how, in many ways, our mind's a little bit tricked of how we perceive these images and these shapes, these objects. A lot of that has to do with the way we, obviously, our culture. Okay, a lot of it plays into that culture. What kind of shapes and aspects we're around every single day, and what we're used to as people. I mean, in every culture, you can say that architecture. There's a lot of different things that are different all throughout the world that we learn and understand with different shapes, sizes. Okay, what's really introduced in our life, and through advertisement that we see every day, our building shapes, everything. All right, there's a lot of different methods and cultures that could shape the way we visualize and view and perceive different items. Okay. All right. So I want to go over just really Gestalt psychology. I know we reviewed this in the first chapter, and how we can visualize the sum of some parts. Okay, and how the whole of things are maybe a little bit different. Right. So real quick, figure and ground. I know we talked about this a little bit, but figure is a pattern that commands attention and stands out. So with this picture especially, it's hard to really see which is the figure. Is it the vase in the middle, or is it the two faces? And ground is the part of the pattern that does not command attention. It's the background. So depending on what we're focusing on, depending on what we're looking at in this picture, either the vase is in the background, right, the ground, and the faces are the figure, which is what we see, or we see the vase as the figure and the ground is the background with the faces. Okay, obviously this picture is a type of illusion which plays on what we perceive first. All right, so with shapes here, sorry, closure is how we can visualize different objects and shapes, and we can really see what types of shapes it's supposed to be. What we perceive as what these shapes are. Although the triangle is not shown here, that's what we perceive. That's the missing figure. That's the missing shape. That's not presented on this, on this different type of graphic. But with the triangle, I mean, obviously we know that this should be a triangle. The same thing with the circles. We know that this should be a circle. It's just that the triangle is laying over top of it, even though it has no boundaries, right? It has no. I guess you could say a different type of a line there to show that it actually is a triangle. Same thing with the square and the circles over here. So closures are ability to fill in the blocks, even though that figure is actually not there. We can picture and figure out that, what, that's supposed to be a square, that this is supposed to be a triangle, even though that those boundaries are not present in this shape. Law of similarity. Principle, we tend to group similar objects together and close our perceptions. All right, so with these X's and O's, do we see columns or do we see rows? It depends what we're visualizing, right? So the columns were all X's, all O's, all X's, all O's, and all X's. And a lot of similarity, do we see them in rows? So XO, XO, X, right? It depends on how we visualize, how we perceive that information, depending on how we group those items together. And with a lot of similarity, again, that's just how we kind of group these objects together, depending on how we perceive them. If they're in rows or in columns, right here, as that figure shows. Law of proximity. Tend to group objects together when they are near each other, right? So do we see five X's and five O's, or do we see five pairs of X's and O's? Again, it depends how we visualize it, but with proximity is how we group objects together, depending how close they are to each other. So for me, I would see five pairs of X's and O's. But again, if you're perceiving it different, you could see five X's, five O's. It's depending on how you visualize it and how that object, how well we relate those objects together, when they're near each other. A good example would be like the desks and chairs in this class. The chairs and the desks, it's not all of my desks, obviously, but for the most part, I see 10 different desks in here, right? Let's just give an example. So 10 different desks. And some people might say, well, I see a table and 10 tables and 10 different chairs. So it's depending on how we group those things together, those objects together, of how we make sense of it and how we perceive it. And that's the law of proximity. Law of continuity. All right, so this is a good example with depending on how lines are, if there's ever an interruption or if there's ever a break in that line. So with this line here, we could see that this line's a straight line. It's going to go on forever, right? But we know that this line here kind of curves and interrupts it. Right, with law of continuity, we prefer perceptions of connected and continuous figures to disconnected and disjointed ones. So we think that this line just kind of ends right here as this line interrupts it or it kind of intersects it, right? But in many cases, that line might continue on. It's depending on how you perceive it. A law of common fate. Gestalt principle, we tend to group similar objects together, share common motion or destination. All right, so with that, like animals grouping together, okay, we kind of group them together depending on what they are, right? Like a herd, okay, it might be a gaggle of geese, right? Murder of seagull or murder of crows, sorry, flock of seagulls, school of fish, right? We group things together depending on what they are and how they kind of come together, like I mentioned before, like a school of fish or flock of seagulls. Right? Common fate is how we group these different people or different things, objects together. And law of Pragma is a principle where states simplest organization requiring the least cognitive effort. So we'll merge as the figure. So this image right here, a bird in the bush. It's that trick like when we're reading through things that, there's two thes in here. If we read through it real quick, we kind of think that there's only one the, and we kind of brush over it. We don't think about it too much. And our perception is off of that there's actually two thes in there. That happens a lot when you're trying to read a book or when you're going through things quick, right? And when you're trying to get the information pretty fast, especially nowadays with social media. There's a lot of things that kind of trick you with that on Instagram, Facebook. I know there's a lot of different examples of this type of principle in Gestalt psychology. Another example maybe would be back in the day there's a fad with a dress. Is it blue and black or is it gold and white? And that was the thing that many people couldn't perceive, right? They're like, oh, we see it in this and we see it this color. It depends on what shade is presented, right? It's depending on how we perceive that color. All right, and that's really all I want to get through. And just know that in cultures, obviously, architecture, shapes, they're all different. And we talked a little bit about that example of that man in the forest, right? How he couldn't perceive mountains that were far away. He thought they were tiny. When he got close to them, he couldn't believe how large they actually were and how fast things move comparable distance, like with cars. It was just a shock to him because he never perceived that sort of speed or that size before. It was just something that totally shocked him. And with perception and cultures, it's totally different and changes, obviously, depending what culture you're in. All right. So, again, I'm going to have a few questions tomorrow on a Google form. That's it. It's not going to be anything crazy. So, yeah, that's all. Have a good one, guys. Take care. And that's pretty much winding down towards the end of this class.